I went to a very good school, in fact in England. And unfortunately, because of that, we grew up, and by the age of about 13, 14, 15, we had a mentality that, you know, we're Muslim, but as a culture, not as a religion. In other words, we didn't believe in God even. We didn't believe in Allah. And this was at the age of like my teenage years. And when I think and I go back at this moment in time and I think about that time, if I had died in that moment, not knowing about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we knew Allah because we were taught about Allah, we taught how to pray. We used to go to the masjid and pray, but without wudu, because our parents can't see whether we made wudu or not. So we'd only go because of our parents. And I think if I died in that state, then Allah knows, perhaps, may Allah forbid, could have entered the hellfire forever and ever and ever. Until I was about like late teenage years, mid to late teenagers, I came home from school. I was doing my A-levels at the time. And I came home and I opened the door and there was a small booklet there. And the booklet was called, "Do you know this book?" So I looked at this book and it didn't look like a religious book. So I picked it up and I started reading this book. And then I found out that it was talking about the Quran. Do you know the Quran? And when I started reading this, I was amazed because it talked about things that it's impossible that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew about. It talked about how the mountains are like pegs, okay? It talked about how the earth, the universe is expanding. Lots of different things that this Quran spoke about. And I was amazed by this, but 2 days later, I was in a physics class. And my teacher, is a very boring teacher, and he was walking up and down the class and he was giving us a dars. And in the lesson, he says the universe is expanding. So I remember I read this 2 days ago from the Quran. And so I put my hand up and I said, "Sir, how long ago did the scientists know? When did they discover that the universe is getting bigger and bigger, it's expanding?" And he said, "It's a long time ago." He said, "It's been 40 years ago." Alright? And I was amazed. I said, "SubhanAllah, this is in the Quran 1400 years ago, 1400 years ago." This small incident got me to read the Quran. And when I read the Quran, that's when I understood that, SubhanAllah, you know, there is no way under the sun that any other religion is correct. But even at that point, I went to various different places. I went to the Christian churches and I used to discuss with the people there. And I went to even the Hindu temple. I went to various places and I used to discuss about the religion. And I was amazed that, you know, the different things people worship and how illogical it was. And so the contradictions in the Bible. In one place it says something, in another place it says something else, and they contradict each other. So after going around a long circle, I eventually came back to Islam. And this is why the most important lesson for me is that when we are young, it's really important to attach ourselves to the Quran. Because as I grew up, I read the Quran but in Arabic. I didn't understand anything what Allah was saying. But when I read this book, do you know this book? It pointed me to the Quran in English, in a language that I understood. And that's why it's so important to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in your own language. Right? Whatever language it is, it could be Urdu, it could be English, it could be whatever language that you understand, you must read the Quran to understand it. You won't understand the details of tafsir, but at least you will understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. And that's something that we should really make an effort to do. Just read the Quran, because when you read the Quran, it's not like any other book. And that is the thing that brought me back to Islam and it saved me. Inshallah. Sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala